So thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
93.
Thanks to Niki for being on the show and telling us about the Gnosis Festival. Unfortunately, because of my schedule, I will not be able to attend, but I wish I could. I hope Niki, or somebody else who attends the festival, can send an email and tell the listeners about it after it's done, and maybe even have a link to pictures. Moving on, the next discussion is with Keith 418 about Thelema, and looking at whether Thelema is a religion or not. This is a meaningful topic in the Thelemic community because how one envisions Thelema, as a religion or a philosophy or something else, determines significantly how you approach the practices and material, and also how you approach Crowley. I hope this discussion will give the listeners a little to think about, and whether or not calling Thelema a religion is a good idea. Here's the discussion with Keith 418.
We have Keith 418 back on the podcast. How have you been, Keith?
Oh, I've been great, John. Thanks for having me, 93.
93. So in the months that I've been in transition, it appears that there's been a big debate arising in the Thelemic community about whether or not Thelema is a religion, or is it a philosophy, or something in between, or something entirely different. What are your thoughts about that ongoing debate right now?
Well, I think it's fascinating. I think it's been really helpful for the community and for those of us who are interested in thinking about the community and thinking critically about the community to look at that particular question and how it sort of spins off into a variety of other issues and concerns. I was talking with a friend today who pointed out that what he finds compelling about this debate is how irrational a lot of people are when it comes to discussing it. On the one hand, they some of them vigorously insist that Thelema is a religion, and then when Crowley, of course, tells people in Magic Without Tears that calling it a religion can lead to what I think he says is a stupid kind of mischief, they don't really want to look at why he discouraged people there from calling Thelema a religion, and their lack of interest in actually confronting that position of Crowley's, his position late in life, is revealing. And I've seen people say, yes, it's a religion, and then when asked to define what a religion is, they say, oh, well, there really isn't a good definition, and it's you're never going to come up with a really good definition of religion, which then leads me to wonder, well, if you can't really use the word accurately or come up with a decent definition, why is it so important to go around telling everyone that Crowley was wrong in Magic Without Tears and that Thelema is really a religion? And other people have suggested to me that by calling Thelema a religion, people will take it more seriously because people have been trained to take religion seriously. Other people have argued that it's a really bad idea to call it a religion because this puts it in the same sort of position as religions that most intelligent Western secular people see as superstitious and silly. So the American leader of the OTO, Sabazius, is very, very adamant that Thelema is a religion, and he said so at his speech in the recent Notocon meeting. And I think that's interesting too. So there's a number of ways of looking at this. I kind of wonder why people aren't as invested in defining Thelema as being, at a guess, 90% self-discipline, which is another quote from Magic Without Tears that people don't seem that interested in looking at. And I very rarely see anyone referencing this in terms of online debates. I guess because if you're overweight and can't quit various habits and have sort of problems that people in the occult community and specifically in the OTO tend to have, then it's kind of not very helpful to have your religion being about the sort of self-discipline that you find very difficult, if not impossible, to do. And I've often challenged people to say, is this really a self-disciplined community? If Thelema is 90% self-disciplined, are the Thelemites, revealing Thelema as self-discipline in their own lives? And if they're, morbidly obese and still leaders of the OTO or, have all of these self-discipline problems, what does that really tell us? And I don't see the self-discipline angle being as popular as the religious angle. Now, one of my friends also pointed out, and I think with some degree of humor, that any idiot can be religious. If you look around religious communities, they seldom discriminate based on intelligence. So if you want a huge number of people to be active in your religious group, and you tell them, oh, don't worry, you don't need to be particularly self-disciplined or very smart, you just have to be religious, then that's going to be popular. At the same time, I think other people have raised, I think you, I would put in this category, have raised some very interesting questions regarding, well, if it is a religion, then how good are we at it as a religion? And I think that's a really interesting way to approach it too. Do we treat it seriously like other religions treat their religions? Do we, have trouble doing things that other religions simply take for granted, like owning property or having people who are leaders make serious commitments? These are all, I think, interesting ways of looking at the problem. So I think the question as to whether or not Thelema is a religion, was Crowley wrong in Magic Without Tears or not, is a very interesting question. The other thing that's come up out of this debate is, and I think this is tremendously healthy, is people looking at sociological work and the history of the sociology of religion, beginning with people like Max Weber and then going on to Niebuhr, and then there are people like people who are influenced by them like Rodney Stark and Yannicone, who I think we've discussed before on the podcast. And that entire way of looking at religious groups from a claimed scientific sociological perspective has been inordinately helpful, because if people are right and this is a religion, then the sociologists who study religion may have a lot to teach us. And as we've looked at the Stark and Bainbridge material, looked at the Yannicone material, looked at Max Weber and other writers, I encouraged people years ago to go look at Max Weber's famous book on the Protestant Reformation and the development of capitalism. I think that this has tremendous opportunities it offers us to examine the Thelema community in new ways. Now, unfortunately, for people, sort of committed to a diehard defense of the OTO and its stumbling leaders, the more you look at the sociology, the less good they look. I mean, it's not happy making for those defending the OTO, because oftentimes sociologists studying new religious movements or cults and cult and sect formation often have very biting and very painful things to reveal about ourselves and our organization and our religion, if that's what it is. So, if you think this is going to be a big happy dance for the OTO, it's not going to be. At the same time, if we study this material carefully and see what it has to teach us, it might help us solve some of our problems and look at some of the ways we deal with things in a better way.
One of the things that I've noticed is that the people pushing Thelema as a religion, and in particular in the OTO, that it's very selective on what they want to push as the religion. They're not looking at the totality of the corpus of Crowley's work. So where Crowley's like, okay, let's say Thelema is a religion. Are you going to do these practices? So, for instance, you have Liber Astarte, where you're actually doing very intense religious worship, but you're doing it in a way that is personal and non congregational, which it seems that the people pushing Thelema as a religion are looking to have big congregations of everybody feeling good. Also, you have a lot of practices that are transgressive, things like idol worship or various practices that are difficult, memorization, or self-analysis, things like that. Those kind of religious practices that are in the Thelemic corpus are totally being just ignored. And instead you get kind of this, well, Thelema is a church and the Gnostic Mass is what it's all about, and everybody can feel good and go to Mass and have their cake and wine and go away from that. And it seems to me that whole thing is pretty limited.
Well, I think there's any number of ways of looking at these sorts of issues. And, one of which is, and I've written about this, is if you talk about religion, most of us see it as worship. It's hard for us to disassociate the idea of worship and religion. And if there are elements of worship involved in Thelemic praxis, which I think there most certainly is, how do they work within the realm of Crowley in the 40s, telling people, well, it's not a religion, don't think of it that way. And there's a lot of ways of looking at this. And I've referred people back to Liber Astarte in particular, because to me, it seems if you're interested in union through devotion and attainment through devotion, and attainment through worship and devotion, that Astarte is where you would want to go to look. And Crowley lays out very strict parameters as to how to perform this sort of yoga work. And he also criticizes it and offers up some basic caveats. And, one of them is the suggestion that love is blind. And I read this when I was going back through Astarte recently, and I thought it was really funny because one of the books Crowley asks people to read to sort of prepare themselves for the very intense emotional commitment that goes into an Astarte working is Romeo and Juliet. And when people have told me, I did this working or I performed Astarte, I always ask them, did you go and read Romeo and Juliet? Because when I did my Astarte reading, I read every book on the list, and one of them was Romeo and Juliet. And I thought it was really funny to be, not out of high school, not, obsessed with Shakespeare and sitting there, in my friend's apartment in Oakland reading a Folger Library edition of Romeo and Juliet. But the thing that Crowley comes back to is that love is blind. And if you become consumed with religious devotion and the emotion that goes into that, it has a blinding effect. And I've thought about that in terms of the way it's so difficult for people to look at the is it or is it not a religion argument, because many of them seem incapable of having what I would say were measured, dispassionate, reasonable speculation conversations about it, and instead seem very committed to saying, yes, it is, or no, it's not. And they get very emotionally engaged in it. And Crowley is telling us this is the problem with this particular form of yoga, is that it is dependent on emotions, and emotions can cut off your ability to think skeptically and rationally, which may be one of the reasons why ultimately he didn't want people to think of Thelema as a religion in the 1940s, because he saw that the more they thought of it that way, the more emotional they got, and the less they were able to engage in critical thinking and a sort of objective mindset. So that to me is really ironic, and is something that I think people should look at. On the other hand, one of the ways I think you would ask is, there's this intense devotion that goes into Astarte, and this intense commitment, so intense that Crowley is warning people against self-mutilation and dangerous practices that they may be tempted to in the course of their absolute commitment to the deity that they have chosen. And you're kind of turning around saying, if everyone is so obsessed with religion and this sort of back to yoga kind of approach, where's the effort and involvement and engagement and passion that he's talking about here? And if it is a religion, aren't they kind of pursuing it in a half-assed and lame way? And that, I think, is a very apt criticism of the people in the OTO in particular who, to my mind, don't really make that kind of deep commitment at any point. In terms of memorization, the leaders right now have been really working to get people to memorize the Mass, memorize the rituals. But the real passion and devotion that lasts an entire lifetime and is very deep and very meaningful and produces great art and great writing and architecture and a really solid community, I don't really see that there.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And that's kind of the problem. The one thing that I have noticed, though, is there is an intense love that seems to be prevalent within the masses of the OTO, and that is kind of their love for the group, and especially the love for the leaders and the unquestioned devotion. So if you attack the leaders or you criticize the leaders, all of a sudden you're attacking their God. You're attacking their identity. You're attacking that which they love. And then they turn around and they, act vehemently against you. So I think we do see it in a strange kind of way. It's the worship of the herd, and it is the herd of the order. Well,
a friend of mine talks about this, and I think some sociologists have looked at it too. They wonder, why do people engage in religions, and why do people, especially in modern times, join religious groups? And a lot of sociologists say that it boils down to exchanging affect. That this is the thing that they keep looking at. People join to have certain answers given. They join, to get compensation for the rewards that they're not able to get in real life, whether they fall short of those rewards or because the rewards the religion offers are rewards no one can have in real life. They're, eternal life, which is not something any of us can really attain to, according to scientists in real terms, in real life. So they go looking for these compensations, and the exchange of group affect and getting into a warm and loving community is one of the things that some sociologists think is the major reason that people get involved with religions to begin with. And you can debate whether or not that sociological model is correct, or whether the exchange of affect among groups is the most important thing. But I look at this and I sort of say, how does this sort of corporate worship and herd